What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel for another episode in the Ask Me Anything series. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend. It feels like it's 1,000 degrees in my room right now, so I might keep this one a little bit shorter than usual. But as always, before we get started, I do want to give a huge shout out and say thank you to each and every one of you who took the time to come up with a question and leave it on the post. Even if your question doesn't get featured in the video, just know I read every single one, and I appreciate all of you guys. If you end up enjoying the video, please remember to leave a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does actually help out the videos a ton. And if this is your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, hit that subscribe button. We're getting super close to 80,000. So with that all being said, let's go ahead and start off with the first question from Caps Coverage, who says, which of the big free agency contracts do you think will have the biggest buyer's remorse from the signing teams early on? I personally think it may be Brady Shea. The Preds committed a lot of money to a guy coming off of a career year and paid him with a deal in both term and AAV like that season was representative of his whole career. That's definitely not a bad pick. Me personally, the first player that comes to mind is Chandler Stevenson, who signed a 7-year deal with the Seattle Kraken worth $43.75 million, a capita of $6.25 million a season. Don't get me wrong, I do not think Chandler Stevenson is a bad player by any means. He was a really good find by the Vegas Golden Knights. He gave Vegas some very productive seasons and complemented their star players nicely. When Mark Stone was healthy and in the lineup, he was often stapled on a line with Stevenson. The two had great chemistry. That being said, in Seattle, he's not going to be playing with a guy like Mark Stone, and Chandler Stevenson isn't the kind of player that's going to be the driving force on his line. In Vegas, he proved to be a solid complementary piece next to star players, but in Seattle, based on what they're paying him, it seems like they're expecting him to come in and be one of the star players, which I think is a very big gamble for a guy who's already 30 years old, has only scored 20 goals in a season once, and really struggled at times this past season, especially when Mark Stone was out of the lineup. To me, this has all the makings of a signing that is going to age very poorly for Seattle. Moving on now to the next question. This one comes from Small Fry 50, who says, talk about the Red Wings and their interesting free agency. Honestly, with the Yzerplan going this long, I need to hear other opinions. I honestly haven't really talked a whole lot about the Red Wings free agency on the channel at this point, because in my free agency review, we only covered the major signings, and Detroit really didn't make any, aside from the Tarasenko signing, if you consider that a major signing, but that one happened a little bit later on in free agency. I did post a video on the second channel talking about the Tarasenko signing when it happened, so if you haven't seen that video yet and you're interested, you can go check that out. The link to my second channel is down below in the description. I know there's a lot of Red Wings fans that were very upset Steve Yzerman wasn't able to land any of the big name free agents on the market. Me personally, I'm not. Sometimes the best signings you make in free agency are the ones that you don't make, and Steve Yzerman has had a pretty spotty track record when it comes to free agency since taking over as GM of the Red Wings. He's made some signings that haven't aged well. Andrew Kopp, Ben Sherratt, Justin Hall. So especially when you look at all the massive contracts that have been given out so far in free agency, I am completely fine with the fact that Steve Yzerman decided to have a quieter free agency this year. Obviously, re-signing Patrick Kane was huge, and I like the Tarasenko signing, especially given the fact that it's just a 2-year deal. The Red Wings top 6 on paper looks a little bit better heading into next season after adding Tarasenko. Last year, you had Larkin, Raymond, DeBrincat, Confer, Kane, and then that last spot in the top 6 was kind of a revolving door. You had David Perron play in that spot sometimes, Robbie Fabry. So adding a guy like Vladimir Tarasenko should round out the Red Wings top 6 nicely, and they didn't break the bank to do it. I like the Erik Gustafsson signing as well. 2 years, $2 million a season. He's coming off of a year in which he did really well for the New York Rangers in a third pairing role. He should replace a lot of what the Red Wings lost with Shane Gostisbehere leaving and signing with the Carolina Hurricanes. I imagine Gustafsson is going to be running one of the 2 power play units. I'm sort of indifferent on the Cam Talbot signing. Should be a slight upgrade over Ville Husso, who really struggled to stay healthy this past season, and when he was healthy, he didn't play well. Assuming it'll be Jack Campbell and Sebastian Cossa in the AHL, that leaves Talbot, Husso, and Lyon, and Steve Yzerman has already came out and said he doesn't expect the Red Wings are going to carry 3 goaltenders in the NHL again, so I'm expecting a move to happen involving a goaltender, whether it's Lyon or Husso. So when it comes to the Red Wings free agency, I'm fine with it. I think it was okay. That being said, definitely still have my concerns about this team heading into next season, especially when it comes to the blue line, which I think needed a complete overhaul this offseason, and so far all Steve Yzerman has done is trade away Jake Wallman in a cap dump and replace Shane Gostisbehere with Eric Gustafsson. I think you can make the argument that the blue line actually has gotten worse so far this summer. It seems like the Red Wings are finally putting a lot of faith in young players to come in and make a big impact, which is good, I think. Simon Edvinsson's expected to play a full-time role in the NHL. Albert Johansson should be in the NHL full-time as well, as he's no longer waiver exempt. I'm excited to see those guys get an extended look in the NHL, but if they struggle, and even when it comes to the forward group, if guys like Berggren, Mazur, Danielson, and Kasper aren't able to come in and make big impacts, I find it hard to believe the Red Wings are going to be able to take that next step or even replicate their success from last season. Next up, this question comes from Hatcher Kane, who says, does Landeskog return this upcoming season back to the player he once was? Landeskog has now missed 2 full NHL seasons. He's 31 years old, so when he does come back to the lineup, I find it hard to believe he's still going to be the guy that can get you 30 goals in a season and be around a point per game like he used to be. That being said, Landeskog isn't really a player who relied on explosive speed or game-breaking skill to be effective. He's a smart player who does a lot of the little things well, and when Landeskog does come back, he's likely going to slot in next to some very talented players, whether it's McKinnon or Rantanen or both, which should make life on him a bit easier. So while I am expecting a pretty big step back from the player that he was 2 years ago, I still believe he's going to be an effective player for Colorado, and that's just the on-ice aspect of it. Obviously, getting your captain and your leader back in the lineup is going to be huge for team morale as well. Moving on now to the next question. This one comes from Bearded Angel, who says, not hockey related, but what is your current favorite TV show you are watching? I'll probably include at least 1 or 2 of these non-hockey related questions per episode now that we're in the dog days of the off season and there isn't really a whole lot going on right now. Really, the only show I'm watching right now is The Boys Season 4, which is currently going on. 1 episode releases per week. I think there's actually only 1 episode left of Season 4. So once the season finale comes out, I'm definitely going to be looking for some other things to watch. So let me know down below in the comments, what are you guys watching right now? Do you have any recommendations? Next up, this question comes from Cheddar and Sour Cream, who says, are you surprised to see Sprong not signed still? He may have his defensive warts, but 89 points in his last 2 seasons is nothing to scoff at. I'd be tripping over myself to sign him for some cheap depth scoring. I definitely am a little bit surprised that he's still not signed. I would say he's certainly the best free agent still available. If I had to make a guess as to why he's not signed, he's a guy who had a breakout season with Seattle in 2022-23, 21 goals in 66 games, signed a 1-year prove-it deal with the Red Wings, and was very productive in a sheltered role once again. So now that Sprong has proven that he's not just a 1-year wonder, I think he's probably in the market for a deal with some term, and maybe there's just not any teams out there willing to give him that. Oftentimes when it comes to players who don't get signed within the first couple of days of free agency and it gets later and later into the summer, they end up just signing a cheap 1-year deal. I think ultimately that's what ends up happening with Sprong, which could end up being a massive steal for whatever team ends up signing him. I made a video on the best remaining UFAs a couple of days after free agency opened, and in that video I said teams like Vegas and Colorado would probably be good fits for Daniel Sprong. Teams that are tight to the cap that could use the cheap depth scoring. Moving on now to the next question. This one comes from Nick Pasquini, who says, been really quiet on Ehlers lately. Where do you think he ends up? At this point, I'm starting to believe Ehlers isn't even going to end up getting traded, and he will still be a Winnipeg Jet come next season. Jets' new head coach, Scott Arniel, has came out and said how much of a fan he is of Ehlers and how he wants him to remain in Winnipeg. That's a player he wants to coach. And when Rick Bowness was away from the Winnipeg Jets for a period of time this past season and Scott Arniel was serving as the interim head coach, Nikolaj Ehlers saw an uptick in ice time during that stretch under Scott Arniel. So I definitely wouldn't be surprised at all at this point to see Ehlers at least start next season with the Winnipeg Jets and then go from there, see how he performs under a new head coach, a head coach that seems to really like his game. I think it's very likely the Jets are prioritizing moving on from Rutger McGroarty as opposed to someone like Nikolaj Ehlers right now as well. So as we get further and further into the summer, I think it becomes more and more likely that Ehlers is still a Jet next season. Next up, this question comes from Patrick, who says, does Vegas have a deep enough forward core to make the playoffs? And also, really appreciate the kind words, and I'm glad you enjoy the videos. Even with the depth Vegas has lost up front, as long as they stay relatively healthy, which has kind of been a problem for them over the last few seasons, I think they're a playoff team. The D core still looks unbelievable. They have a really solid starting goaltender in Adin Hill. If he gets hurt and misses any long period of time, then I think they could run into some problems, especially if Ilya Samsonov isn't able to bounce back from the season he just had with the Maple Leafs. But in the end, I think Vegas is going to be fine and are at least going to be good enough to make the playoffs. I don't know if I view them as one of the, top 2 or 3 contenders to come out of the Western Conference. It's very important for guys like Eichel and Stone to remain healthy throughout the season. If they miss as many combined games as they did this past season, then I think the Golden Knights could really struggle. So as long as those 2 guys stay healthy, along with Adin Hill, I think Vegas should still be pretty solid, especially if a guy like Alexander Holtz can have a breakout season and Victor Olofsson can get back to being a 20 to 25 goal scorer. And now finally finishing out the video with the last question from B-Dog Breaks, who says, what do you think about the Askarov situation? Will he get dealt, or will they hold on to him for the future? I find it very hard to believe they're going to hold on to him for the future, considering the fact that Saros signed an 8-year extension and is still signed through next season on his previous contract, so Saros has 9 more years left under contract with Nashville. When you draft a goaltender as high as Nashville drafted Askarov, 11th overall back in 2020, you're putting a lot of faith in that goaltender to be the future number 1 of your franchise. And now with Saros having 9 more years under contract in Nashville, there's not going to be a whole lot of opportunity for a guy like Askarov to get a ton of starts. This is a guy who's been good over the last 2 seasons in the AHL, got into a couple of games this past season for Nashville in the NHL and looked very good as well. He's 22 now. You have to imagine Askarov, sooner rather than later, is going to be wanting to get an extended look in the NHL. And at this point, it just doesn't seem like that's going to happen in Nashville. There was a lot of talk about Askarov potentially being traded at the draft. It was reported that Nashville is willing to move him, but the asking price is very high. I think in the end, the most likely outcome is Askarov does end up getting moved at some point. It was a bit of a head scratcher when Nashville signed Saros to that extension, but it became pretty clear that they were going in a different direction after the free agency had. This is a team that's trying to win now, and obviously the best opportunity to win now over these next couple of seasons is keep Saros around. So I definitely don't blame the Nashville Predators for extending Saros and potentially fracturing the relationship with Askarov given the direction they're headed. It's not like Barry Trotz was the GM when Nashville selected Askarov back in 2020 anyways. As long as the Predators are able to land a decent return for Askarov in a trade, I think the majority of Predators fans are going to be fine with how the whole situation played out, especially after free agency. So that is going to wrap up this episode of the Ask Me Anything series. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, huge thank you to every single one of you who took the time to come up with a question and leave it on the post. I appreciate all of you. You all make these interactive videos so much fun for me to do. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to see more throughout the off season, then be sure to drop a like. That's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it helps out the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll talk to you all again soon.